Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone. Welcome to the All Paths podcast, where we support and celebrate all of the different ways there are to try to grow your family. We're your hosts, Emily and Lauren from the nonprofit organization All Paths Family Building. And today we're talking with Carol about her journey and her work in this space. Carol, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get into your story, we'd love for you to just introduce yourself to our listeners.
Absolutely. My name is Carol. I'm a Canadian American, a mom of 5, and live in the hills of West Hampton, Massachusetts, and run Empty Arms Bereavement Support, which I think I'm going to share a lot about. So I'll just leave it at that.
Great. We're so happy to have you with us, Carol, today. Can you tell us a bit about your journey to starting a family? Where did it all begin?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I started wanting to have kids when I was probably like 5 years old. I always wanted to be a mom. I always was obsessed with babies. I always loved babysitting. And my husband and I got married when we were both 25. And we originally sort of had this plan where we were going to responsibly work for a number of years and then start a family. And then after 1 year, I was like, this is kind of dumb. We have no idea how long it might take us to get pregnant. So like we should just not, because like, so we get pregnant early. Great, we'll figure it out. And I got pregnant that month. So we did not encounter the roadblocks that I had planned around. And that felt shocking. My next place in my brain went was, this must be too good to be true. This couldn't just be the way it works, that you just decide to have a baby and then suddenly you're pregnant. And I did start to bleed at around 9 weeks, at which point I was like, oh, well, this is it. I knew this was too good to be true. And it ended up being nothing. And so I went on to have this like beautiful, healthy pregnancy where, just very textbook. Every time I went to the doctor, everybody just said, oh, look, you're so cute. Look how great your baby's doing. Look how great you're doing. Bye-bye. See you in 2 weeks. And it went like that until I was 41 weeks and 1 day. And at that point, I would say that I had basically no anxiety about my pregnancy. I mean, I don't think once I had my anatomy scan, which was clear, I don't think that I really invested very much time into thinking about other outcomes besides having a healthy baby, an alive baby, I should say. And when my water broke, my baby stopped moving. And so that happened when I was still at home. And I went into the hospital, in the middle of labor, like to be admitted to deliver my child, and was told that she did not have a heartbeat. And
I'm so sorry.
It's like still astonishing to me that happened. It was so outside of the realm of like anything that I knew could really happen, because I think what your brain automatically does is when you hear about a story like that, your brain tries to kind of say like, oh, well, there must have been something wrong with the baby. Like maybe the baby was too early, or like maybe the mom was sick, or, you kind of like rack up the risk factors. Oh, maybe she ate brie. I mean, whatever. Any of those things that you're told, best to do this or not do this during pregnancy, you're kind of almost tricked into feeling like if you do those things, all will be well. And I had done all of those things. And so I don't think there was a cell in my body that understood that like healthy mom and healthy baby could equal no take-home baby. So I was already in the middle of labor, so I avoided what many people have to kind of go through in terms of figuring out whether they're going to induce or, go home, pack their bag or whatever, because I was already there. I was like well into labor. And so I was totally floored. And in my mind, when I think about that experience, it's like I'm watching, even at the time that it was happening, it was like I was watching myself from the ceiling. Like I could not believe that it was my body there. I could not believe that I was still going to have to give birth. And I also, like, my brain completely disconnected from like any anything that came before that point, like I didn't feel like I was still having a baby. My predominant like feelings in my body during that time were like panic and shame. It was not sadness. My brain was not there yet, like in that traumatized state. It was just, it wanted to get out of there. And it was really embarrassed about what it was going to be like when I got out of there. Those were basically the two things. And that is absolutely so common, both of those things. If they had said to me, we can just give you a C-section, take this baby out and send you on your way, I would have been like, awesome, get me out of here. My brain was like hot to trot. If the more I can avoid this, the better I'll be, which is many people's instinct and is actually categorically wrong. It's false information. Like avoidance does not lead to better outcomes. Avoidance leads to worse outcomes. So fortunately, I had a really great care team that did a great job of doing some of the things that I now do professionally in terms of just kind of laying out the landscape of what this can look like for families without ever asking me the question of like, do you want to do these things? They just said, for most families, they spend time together and people often invite their families in to meet their baby. And I was sitting there thinking like, nope, 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 nope. And then as soon as my daughter was born, I was completely all in to every single thing that they had said, and not even in a conscious way. The way that I describe it is that I followed exactly what my body and my brain wanted to do from the second my daughter was born. But then when I would have that thought, like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm holding my dead baby, I'd be like, no, no, it's okay. They don't think you're weird. They told you you could hold your dead baby. And then when I would have a thought like, oh my God, she's so cute, I want to take a picture, I would interrupt myself being like, you can't take pictures of dead people by being like, well, actually you can. It turns out they told you you could take pictures. And, thinking like, I want my parents to meet her. She's so cute. And instead of thinking like, well, that would not be possible. She died. I was like, oh, that's a thing people do. So I can do that. So all of those permissions ended up coming into play. And so even in that moment, I was incredibly aware. And I should state that I have and had at that time a background of working in sociology and in like identity theory and like sort of I had already spent a lot of time like sitting in the headspace of like social norms and like decision making and like influences and framing and staging and like so it's not like my brain was just concocting this stuff. I was fitting it into a framework that I understood like as a scholar and was really aware of how self-conscious I felt, like doing these things that on the one hand were just like completely instinctive to me and felt so right, but then on the other hand felt so like borderline deviant because they did not fit into like my previous understanding of like how the world works. And so I ended up coming out, 12 hours out from my baby dying with this like incredible appreciation for how the people that had been with me at the time had like set the stage for me so that I was able to like lean into those instincts. And that's not something that everybody gets. If you just have a nurse that just says, do you want to hold your baby? Like most people are just like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the answer to that question is supposed to be. They're not even thinking about what they want. They're just thinking about what is this answer supposed to be because that is how human beings operate. So I went home and I will abbreviate it to just say that I probably had like the best support structure that a person could have in terms of like really supportive family on both sides. I had a partner, we had a home, we had money for food. So we had all of our basic needs met to excess. And people were incredibly generous. They were incredibly compassionate. Both of our workplaces were really generous with leave time. And I just kept thinking about how well positioned I was and how I still like basically did not want to wake up every single day. And it made me think like, I don't understand how anyone survives this. Like if I can't survive this because I didn't think I would, like how would anyone survive this? Because I have like all the tools and all the things, and I still want to die like 23 and a half hours out of every day. So, and to be clear, that that sentiment was not ever me being actively suicidal, ever. It was me not wanting the life that I was in and just being like, I cannot bear to do this anymore. It is too sad. It's too awful. I'm too powerless in this life. I can't change the place that I'm in. And in order to change the place that I'm in, like the only way you can change it is to actually repeat the situation that caused your trauma. That's the only go around. The only way to get yourself to the place that you want to be is to try it again. And that's feels terrifying and impossible. And I mean, I don't even know if there's like another situation I can think of in the whole wide world where in order to like get to the place you need to be, you got to do the thing again. And most people do. And I did. I will like summarize grief to just say that like the one of the things that I often talk about when I'm talking about the grief for a baby is that if you think about the intensity of what your brain is wired to do in order to keep you stable, to take care of a newborn, it's like all of that energy and then it just like it stops, but it doesn't stop. It's all there, and all of those instincts are in your body. So your brain is like screaming at you, like, get your baby. What are you doing? Why are you sitting on the couch? Like, find your baby, get your baby. Like, like in the same way that like if you took like a kitten out of like a mother lion's den, she would be like, "Oh my God, I gotta find the kitten." Like that's what your brain is doing. Like it doesn't understand that your baby is dead. So you just feel like perpetually panicked and nobody can help you. And it's just like the most all-encompassing experience. And I describe myself and would describe virtually every single person I've ever known in this situation, like literally without function. Like your brain is offline and you cannot do anything. You can't think through a complete thought. You can't execute a plan because you're just so disorganized in your brain that you can't figure out like what to do with yourself.
How did things evolve from that point in the following days, weeks, months?
Over time, each and every one of us like kind of like starts to eventually like feed ourselves Cheerios with a spoon and put our t-shirt on the right way and like little by little like we start to appear like we are alive again and going back to some of the like things that I used to do, like going back to the classroom, I was a teacher. The next fall was actually really grounding for me. I thought that I was not even going to be able to do it. But when I got there, I was like, I know how to do this and I'm good at it. Like the rest of my life, I have no clue how to do, but like this, I know how to do. So that was a real surprise for me to find that being at work was a really positive experience. I had been just so overwhelmed and terrified at the prospect of returning. And so then I had my next baby less than a year later.
Oh, wow.
And it was terrifying. And
Mhm.
I don't think it would have been easier if I had waited 5 years because I did have babies. If point zero is when Charlotte died, my babies were born just shy of 1 year later, just shy of 3 years later. Then I had a period of infertility. And then I had another baby 6.5 years later, and then 7.5 years later. And they were all really, really hard.
Yeah.
So there was not a pregnancy where I didn't worry. I was afraid of the same thing every single time. And that's a when the thing that you're anxious about is a previously experienced trauma, it's an incredibly different experience than just like global anxiety. It's something that you know could happen, but has never happened to you. So it's a very visceral, like inside your body fear.
Mm.
And it's balanced a little bit by the fact that you now have the potential to have an alive baby, but you don't believe that that is going to be your outcome until at some point down the road. It's different for everybody.
Yeah.
So I had my son Liam just shy of a year later, and then I had my daughter Aoife just shy of 3 years later, and I really did really well after they were born. And that really surprised me. I thought I was going to be like a wreck. I remember talking to the pediatrician and being like, I'm probably going to call you every day. And I wasn't. I felt like really, I think that part of losing my baby was learning really quickly and effectively in her absence, like how hardwired I was to be a mom, because I could like feel the feelings of like the instincts that I had. And so then when my baby was there and was alive, I was like, all I got to do is follow that feeling. And maybe that means the baby will be fine. So, what was interesting is that I then I could like join the baby group and make lots of friends, which I did. And I had some intermittent connections with peers during the year and beyond because I kept going to a support group that I went to in that was at Bay State Medical Center in Springfield. And it was incredible for me to witness that I was not alone, but the structure of the group that they ran was not such that I actually made connections with people.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
People didn't introduce themselves, say what their name was. They didn't share their story. People would just be like, I'm really struggling this week because this happened. But there was no structure offered to kind of give people
Mhm.
like a starting place. And then there was
Yeah.
no way to, I mean, you could have gone up to someone at the end of the group and been like, Emily, your story really resonated with me. Like, can I have your number? But that requires bravery. And I did
Yeah.
not have that. So I didn't have connections that fulfilled me in that way. And then when I had a baby, I had connections that fulfilled me, and I became really aware of. I mean, I use this example all the time with people who've never lost a baby, but who have parented a newborn. And I say, like, remember the time where, for the first time, you confessed something about the way that you felt about parenting your child, and then someone else was like, of course, me too. Like I was crying at 3 o'clock in the morning while I was nursing my baby last night and I dropped 5 F-bombs. Like, yeah, you and every single other person with a baby. But
Right.
when you're the person who's in the middle of the night with your first baby and you're frustrated and you're scared and you're sad and you're exhausted, you're like, I'm a terrible mom. Right. And it isn't until you are able to realize in like a real meaningful situation, like, oh, this is just what motherhood looks like, that you're able to kind of make sense of it and just like put yourself into like the category of mom. And I still had this like missing piece from that connection with people because I had this other baby and I did not know how to fit her in. And I wanted to have that same thing around that experience. Like I wanted to be like, here's how I feel. Like anyone else feel like that? Because
Mhm.
I kind of knew like probably the answer is yes, but I've never actually heard it. I need to hear it. I need to
Right.
see it. I need
Yes.
to hear it.
That validation is so
It
key.
is so key. And it's different from, I think that most people who do peer support also go to therapy. And so we can
Yes.
all relate to the fact that, like, your therapist can be your favorite person. They can tell you a million times this thing that you're going through,
Mhm.
totally normal, means nothing about where you'll be in 10 years,
Right.
yada, yada, yada. And you're like, smile, nod, smile, nod, smile, nod. Maybe you're right. But then when you see it in someone else, you're like, I'm
Yes.
okay. It's a
Right.
very different experience.
That's when you can really believe it in your body, is when someone else
Exactly.
says, I see you and I am you.
That is such a great way of putting it. You like really feel it like not just here, but like all the way down. It's
Right.
relief, right? It's like
Yes. Yes.
relief. You're like, I fit in somewhere. I'm okay. I'm gonna be okay. Like maybe even the way that
Yes.
I am right now is a form of being okay. Even though it
Right.
feels uncomfortable, like maybe this is one of the versions of being
Hmm.
okay for me because this thing is not pathological. It's part of
Right.
this journey, like it's not
Yes.
pathological to be tired and exhausted when you're parenting a newborn. It is part of the journey. It doesn't feel good. You look forward to not being that exhausted, but it's just part of how it is. And ultimately,
Hmm.
you can kind of accept it. So I was able, through a very long process, which I will not get into in this podcast, start a support group in 2007. So that was 4 years after Charlotte died at my local community hospital. And essentially, the childbirth center there, I'd had all three babies there. I had offered myself as a resource to other parents that had experienced loss and had done some of that. Said
Hmm.
they, were kind of questioning whether it makes sense to be sending people down to Springfield. And I said, I'll do it. Like, sign me up. I want to do this. So originally we became a chapter. I think we maybe still are an active chapter of SHARE, which is a national pregnancy
Yep.
and infant loss awareness or support
Hmm.
network. And so we did training at SHARE. And somehow
Great.
the person who we trained with at SHARE was this woman, Kathy Lammert, who is so amazing. She was the director of SHARE at that time. And she just, I think, thought we were kind of adorable. And it was my husband and I and this one other woman, Sally Howland, who was kind of her loss was like 15 years earlier. So she was kind of like
Mm.
a childbirth generation ahead of us, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
sure.
she had had a loss and she'd been supportive to us and she was really interested in it also. And Kathy just liked us and we ended up having her come out here like 3 times on her own to teach classes in Massachusetts. And
Wow.
so I just studied her like a textbook every time she came. I watched her speak like 19 times. And then at some point after she had had 3 separate trips out here, I was like, Kathy, we need to do more education. And she was like, honey, you've been doing this for like 9 years and you've watched me speak like 100 times. I think maybe you could do the
Wow.
talks. So that was how we ended up getting, that's how I ended up sort of like becoming the educator is through Kathy and
Mm,
through doing some work with the Pregnancy Loss and Infant Death Alliance, which is also a national organization. And so anyway, I'm kind of digressing. Our support groups basically just kept growing. They kept
mm,
growing. They kept attracting people. It was so amazing. Even though I felt in my life when I started the group, I felt like a pretty normal person. Like I wasn't
mm.
having episodes of like, I can't wake up in the morning. I'm so depressed because my baby died. Like I was in a good place, but it was just still like transformative and revolutionary and still continues to
Yeah.
be to have this side community which like
Hmm.
infiltrates and overlaps with my other communities of people that have all walked this road because it's such as you all know
Mm.
it is your identity. It is when your
Yes.
baby dies or you experience like roadblocks to family building. It's not just an event or a time period. It is something that
Mm.
changes the essence of how you relate to the world, identify with the world, view your family. There's always like all these contingency situations in your head. Like if
Mhm.
then, right? Like I am where I am
Yeah.
now, like despite these things that happened, but if they hadn't happened, I'd be somewhere else. And it's just kind of mind blowing.
Yeah. So, what does Empty Arms support look like now?
So I have loved watching these groups grow. And, in a 9-hour podcast, I would go through sort of the whole evolution of how all of the things grew and expanded. But I think that to make that succinct, always the expansion that we've had at Empty Arms has been at the behest of the current community and
Mhm.
like also anticipated unmet needs. And so
Mhm.
for example, very early on, we had we always would welcome people who had termination for medical reasons into our stillbirth and infant loss group because at that time, which was, in like like 2000, say 9 to 12, like we still didn't have the Harmony test. Like people did not find out
Mm.
about their genetic anomalies until they were 20 weeks pregnant. So it was always later terminations for TFMR.
Mhm. Mhm.
And, through my work with like warmly welcoming and including these families, which we still would always do in that group setting, I was like, there's a whole other conversation here that needs to be happening. Like,
Mhm.
there has to be like a closed door setting
Mhm.
for people to talk about what that decision was like for them. And
Mhm.
and that was coming from conversations. And so then it's like, okay, you people, you're already part of this organization. I'm feeling the passion. What do you think about this idea? Yes, let's go. That's how basically everything happened, is sort of from inside, like trust building and then building from there. So then the really transformative thing that happened, we were only in Western Mass. And so our cohorts were not big because this is not a heavily populated part of the state. And so we would think things like, oh, we'd really like to have an LGBTQ plus group, but like, like our cohort is going to be like 3 people. And like, what if one can't come? Then that's not even a support
Mhm.
group. So maybe we just can't
Right.
have that separate space. And so when COVID came along in 2020 and we all had to go online and we thought, oh no, we're going online. This is going to be terrible. Well, it turned out it wasn't terrible. It was great. It like vastly increased people's access.
Mhm.
And suddenly this like huge door was open of like, wow, like if we can serve people from across the state, we can have cohorts that are big enough for
Right.
all of these things. And we're not thinking about, people's like travel time or when they're available
Right.
because it just makes everything so much easier. So, um,
Right.
since 2020, we have expanded from 4 monthly groups to 15 monthly groups. And they're not 15 different. We do have three termination for medical reasons groups, and that's just because that group serves a national audience. And so it's a huge cohort. So we just split it, people go into three different groups. And the thing that I think is brings people back to our groups is that we have been really thoughtful about how to design a space where people can actually use.
Mm.
And so we have very, very clear but generous kind of opening statements and guidelines, which we don't call guidelines. Well, I guess we call them guidelines, but they're not ground rules. I guess that's the one that I don't like.
Mm.
I feel like rules makes you feel like you're a kid and you might do something bad.
You're scared to participate or say anything because you don't want to do the
Totally.
Yeah.
wrong thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
And so we're
Hmm.
really clear that like we have guidelines that we have put together because this is really, this is all of our like worst experience ever.
Yeah.
And we're doing this really bizarre thing where we're inviting all of these people who don't know each other to come into a room and talk about the hardest thing that's ever happened to them. And like that's weird.
Hmm.
Like, why would you want to do that? You think it's a weird idea until you're in it, and then you're like, oh, I'm free.
Yeah.
This is
So we're
exactly what
very
I needed.
clear
Yes.
about, we've set these up because we want this to feel like a place where you can know that you're safe to share, to know that what you share is never going to come around and like surprise you in a place where you don't expect it, that there are, certain things that are not going to get addressed in here that one of the guidelines that I love is just, if the conversation ever turns to something that feels too hard for you, like we can turn that conversation on a dime. Like shout, unmute and shout it out. Send me a message in the chat. Like our goal is not to send you out of here feeling like you've been triggered in this meeting. And I don't think anyone has used that, like has exercised their right to do that in like 8 years. I mean, it almost never happens, but I think like knowing, like,
Hmm.
oh, like if this feels hard for me, I have the ability to make this come back around to a place where I feel safe again. So
Hmm.
we've been very successful in doing what my goal was with Empty Arms, which was I wanted to give people friends. That's it.
Yes.
I wanted people to feel like they had actual connections with people that were in their same state. And I mean, we've kept the boundaries on Massachusetts. It's fairly flexible. We're kind of like, could you drive a car to Massachusetts? Like, somebody, if you like
Could
really,
you find it
really
on a map?
yeah, exactly. No, but I mean, it is like, it's more like, oh, this person is like a 2 hour, 2 hours over the New York state line, but like
Yeah.
they had a twin loss and like there isn't really anywhere else to send someone with loss
Yeah.
of one twin. And we have this
Hmm.
great cohort. So like, of course, we're going to let them in. And it puts a little bit of guardrails on. I think that for us, like we have really I say we, but it's really me because I'm the person that's been in this through the transition from being tiny to being a little bit bigger. But like I know every family, every baby, every birthday, every story. And there's something
Yeah.
about that that really means a lot to the people that come in. They feel very, very known and they feel like this environment is a place where they get to be their baby's parent, where that is their identity, and they don't have that identity anywhere else. And so their other identities become secondary. And I think that having a place where you just get to be like normal about this is kind of how I always phrase it. It's like, it's not
Hmm.
your like, awkward side story. It just gets to be part of the story of you. It takes the pressure off the other people in your life. And so then if you have like a cousin or a friend who like isn't really showing up, somehow it matters less. It's like you can be
Yeah.
a little bit more accommodating and forgiving for
Mm.
like that person doesn't know how to show up for me.
Right.
Fortunately, I have this community of people who show up for me exactly the way that I need them to. And so over time, and it's
Mm.
not right away or maybe even ever for some people, but people will get to a place where they're like, I don't need, my neighbor Susan to be the person that I can turn to when I'm having a bad day. My neighbor Susan can be my
Right.
favorite person to chat to in the front lawn. She can make me dinner sometimes. And that can be a great friendship. And I don't have to like resent her because she can't help me when I'm sad. So
Right.
I feel like that those like social identities have been a really important part of Empty Arms. And
Mhm.
Hmm.
it's been really surprising to me. I'm at a point now where when I train new facilitators in our methodology, I say, like, when this really gets underneath your belt, you don't do a lot of facilitating because it's so
Yeah.
clear to people how they participate and they're so respectful
Hmm.
because those guidelines
Hmm.
help to make them feel so held and safe that, it's a really safe place for people to just dump what they need to dump. And in addition to that, we have had for 15 years in the Valley programs in the hospitals. We have protocols where we go in, we have a companion team that goes in at the time of loss for people that are inpatient. And so
Okay.
that has also given us just like this very intimate, like knowledge of the origin story of the people that we will then see in group. And
Mm.
for me as an educator, to be able to witness like that whole arc in a way that most other professionals never get to do, because usually you're either there at the
Mm-hmm.
time and then you're like, bye, I'm never going to see you again, or you're seeing people afterwards, has really helped to develop my philosophy around how caregivers can sort of help people to emerge with their own best case scenario of the worst thing that's ever happened to them. And as time has gone on, as an organization, we have been working quite hard. Our current sort of emphasis is thinking about, our companion program that we have in the Pioneer Valley hospitals is possible because we're 18 years deep in our community here. And so if we're looking for a
Wow.
peer to come and show up at the bedside, I have very, very many peers who live in this very valley that I can tap and say, like, would you want to be trained for this? And as we're expanding
Hmm.
into other parts of the state with much bigger populations and way more births, like that will never exist. I mean, maybe it could exist in 40 years, but it's not going to
Right.
exist anytime in the
Mhm.
near future. And so, what is true about our companion programs is that Empty Arms becomes like an instantaneous resource for people when we visit them in the hospital. They are in touch with us
Hmm.
constantly over the days and weeks after their discharge. They have a million
Hmm.
questions. We're showing up and helping them with all kinds of random things. And most people in other parts of the state were basically dependent on their own Google search, or like maybe their nurse remembered us from a training, or maybe, it
Mm.
was hit or miss haphazard referrals. And so we're working to try to get our materials in all of the hospitals, which seems
Hmm.
like an enormous task, but actually when we look at it, we're like, I think we can do this. And I think it would be a game
Hmm.
changer because our materials are all structured kind of in the same way as our support groups. Every single
Hmm.
person that's ever come to us has been discharged from the hospital with a whole bunch of stuff that they don't want to look at. And
Right.
so,
Yep.
why don't you want to look at it? Because you don't want that to be your identity, because like, it's boring. You can't read because your brain doesn't work.
Hmm.
So we've been trying to like put together basically like tactile things, like it's literally like a gift bag. So like, what you're more likely to, or are you more likely to look at paperwork or to peer into a present? You're more likely to peer into a present. It still might take you 2 weeks to peer into the present, but it probably will take you 6 weeks to open the paperwork.
Harder
So
to lose the gift bag too.
harder to lose the gift
Yes.
bag. It's bigger and clunkier.
Yeah.
You might have curiosity about it in a different way. But
Mhm.
I think the
Right.
most important thing is the things that we put in the gift bag are very clearly, curated by a population of people that have done this before. So it's
Hmm.
like there's a mug that says you are not alone. There's like tea for milk reduction. There's cream for milk reduction. There's like a hand sewn, I call them a wheat bag, like that you can put in the microwave or the freezer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
So one
yeah.
of those. It's got like a memory candle for your baby. It has a card that's written by another parent just saying, like, I'm so sorry
Mm.
that you're reading this card. Like, this is the most terrible thing to go through. And there's so many of us out here that want to be able to support you when you're ready. So, really trying to personalize the resource so people, if you look at a brochure and it just has a number or an email, you're like, well, what happens when I call that number? I don't even know like who will answer the phone. What will I have to say to explain what's going on? Our information says things like, if you need us, text the word support to this number. because then we get to be in charge of the conversation. Are you comfortable sharing a little bit about what happened? I can introduce myself first and say, here's how I ended up being the person on the other end of the phone. And just trying to figure out how to give people across the state that comfortable entry point, because people that come sooner to group, if I was 4 people, I would study this, and there are studies about this, but they're just like, I'm so glad I came when I did. It's been a lifeline for me. And people who come later are always like, God, I wish I had found this sooner. So, like, our anecdotal bank of evidence says, like, if you can get to a meeting, 1 or 2 or 3 months into your journey, it's really helpful. And I think part of it is that it's a grounding that happens when you're still in that like profoundly disorganized space. So it like helps you as you're sort of like reinstating your like routines and your
Mhm.
life,
Yeah.
and means you have some
Building new routines.
exactly, you're
Yeah.
building new routines, and then that sort of sense of self of like it's reluctant. You don't come, it takes a while to come to a place where you're like, I'm a bereaved mom. Like that's not a label that anybody like wants to
Right,
sport.
right.
So there's like a natural sort of window of like denial and just like I don't even know what the word is for it. Like I just like hated like somebody would like give me a book about baby loss and I would be like, I hate that book. Like I don't want to
Right,
need that book. Like I want to
right. I don't want
burn
this to be real.
no,
This is
I
not
want
a
to
book that I
burn it in
need.
my wood
Right.
stove. So, you have to
Yeah.
like get over that hump of just being like, I reject this life to being like,
Hmm.
I wish I could reject this life, but unfortunately I'm still here, so I better figure something out to survive.
Right.
So, I feel like, what we have been working on is trying to make it really easy for people to get in with us, and then also to think about different things that people need. So beyond our support groups, when we were tiny, I was like is it the Yenta? That's like the matchmaker in the community. Am I making that
Oh,
word up? Anyway, but I was the matchmaker. Like I was just like the village matchmaker. Like I would get on the phone with someone, I would hear their story, and I would be like, who I bet she would like? I bet she would like Hannah. They have almost the same story and they both have a 2-year-old at home. And then I would be like, hey, Hannah, would you like to talk to this new person? And I would just like constantly be like matching people. And after COVID, as the organization grew, I became like totally unable to do that anymore because I wasn't knowing the people in the TFMR groups. I wasn't knowing all the people in miscarriage. So now we've started this fellow parent program that basically we have a staff member who kind of catalogs the people that want to show up in that role. And then any new intakes, they're offered a one-to-one. And most people say yes. Most people want that. So, we're just kind of trying to figure out how to offer, there's people that, maybe a group would benefit them if they came, but they just really don't like the idea of coming to a group and they're not going to do it. And so, if we know, as long as we know that there's people that are never going to want to give that a try, we're trying to think about, well, what else can we have? And then the last thing that I want to share just programmatically is that as part of our expansion, in Western Mass, we always had, events and we would do in-person groups and things that people could show up to and be together in. And so we now have 5 different social hubs across the state that all have like a leader and are tasked with planning 3 in-person support groups and 3 other events each calendar year so that there are local-ish options for people to tap into should they choose to. So, I mean, that's always a little hard because, local is so variable based on your resources and your family structure and so on and so forth. But it's a start. And, hopefully the more involvement we get, the more we will be able to involve people. So, yeah, so I
That's
just gave you like
fantastic.
the whole thing without you asking me a single question.
it was wonderful. You kept like
Well,
answering
it's
Wow.
like
questions
an
before we even asked
evolution,
them.
right? It's like the
Yeah.
Yes,
story of my
you know the
family. The
story.
story of my family just
No.
evolves into the story of Empty Arms.
Yeah. And the work that you're doing is amazing. The expansion is so exciting
Mm,
to hear. You're one of our favorite
yes.
resources to refer folks
Yeah,
to
it's
in
really
Massachusetts.
empower. It feels so good.
And I love how you talked about the integration. of your identities and how
Mhm.
important that is. Because like you said, it's instinctual to want to put this loss and grief identity over here and walk away from it or like be in denial of it, leave it alone. But then as you're ready to heal, it's so important to integrate that back into who you are because it is part of who you are. And when
Absolutely.
you can have your community then overlap with your other communities and then feel like, oh, I am okay. I can be more whole
Yeah.
because I'm integrating these pieces of my life
Yeah.
that are real, as painful as they are.
Hmm.
But there's hope and there's healing because of who I was able to find to validate my experience.
Exactly. And I mean, I kind of like think of it like it's like, like a little Venn diagram, like two overlapping
Yes.
circles that like there's going to be pieces of your loss and your trauma history that you might not really choose to take into
Hmm.
your, I mean, I think about that. I'm, over 20 years out and I have like the most amazing friendships with people who I consider to be like some of my best friends that I've made through my four kids. And
Hmm.
many of those people like do not know the details of my baby dying. They just know
Right.
that I had a baby. But I just don't, it doesn't it doesn't really appeal to me to I don't need them to know that story. I just don't
Hmm.
need them to. It wouldn't offer
Right.
anything back to me. Whereas sharing
Mm.
that story with somebody who has a common denominator with it is
Hmm.
like a mutually beneficial experience. And it's not
Right.
like I'm holding back. If any friend that didn't know the story was like, I'd really love to know more about what happened when Charlotte was born, I would be like, thank you so much for your curiosity. I'd love to tell you. But it's
Right.
not something that when Charlotte first died, if I could have like handed everybody I met like a 7-page
Mm.
pamphlet that like told the whole story from beginning to end, I would have gladly done it because I just felt
Mm.
so invisible. And I was like, oh my God, you have no idea what I've been through.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And I don't feel like that
Right.
anymore at all. Like I don't need any of those details to be part of like my forward facing public
Mm.
identity.
That's really reassuring, I think, or it will be really, really reassuring for a lot of people who are listening who might still be in the thick of it, where you feel like this is all you'll ever be. This is
Right.
your story starts and ends right in this moment, and
Mm.
nothing
Right.
is ever going to kind of come
And
forward. You're never going to be able to move forward from it. So I think
it
that's
is a
going to be
very
really reassuring to
bizarre
folks.
thing, like being in a position where I look at my life and I can viscerally remember, because that's how trauma works in your brain, like how I
Mm.
felt coming home without my baby. And
Hmm.
like I can't even put words to how I felt. I was so sure that I was never going to be even like 5% okay ever again. And
Mm.
I have had the best life. Like, I'm such a happy person, and there's no thing that I could even say that contributed to that. Like, there's no way to identify it. It's like, go ahead and go sit down in front of the mirror and watch your hair grow. Have fun. Let me know when it gets 2 inches longer. Like, you can't see, measure, identify something that's so minutely incremental. And so there's the fact that when I'm talking to people who are struggling a lot with early grief, that there's no strategy to be offered. But then there's also the fact that like I don't think I wanted a strategy in the beginning. I mean, I and so many other people, like in the beginning, you like equate your grief with your love for your child. You're like, I feel this way because I love my baby so much, and I don't want to stop feeling this way because it's like walking with a stone in your shoe. Like every time I step down, I'm reminded of how much I love my baby, and all I want is to make
Mm.
sure I don't forget that baby and nobody else
Hmm.
forgets that baby. And so I'm careful about how I I share sort of my sense of like total and complete normalcy because I don't want people to be like, oh, well, she's not like me because she's normal now,
Right.
and I won't ever be normal. So now everything that she says goes out the window. So when I share in group, I'm always very cautious to make sure I'm sharing about what it was like at the beginning and then kind of like how things evolved, but like making sure that that is a process and not just like an end result, that it takes like a lot of time and work and just kind of like reconceptualizing like all the things, I guess.
Mhm.
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 So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. The space that you create is so wonderful and so needed. And I think, like I said, there's
Mhm.
so many people who have benefited from your support, whether it's the groups or the bedside, over the years. And
Mhm.
so excited that you're expanding throughout more of the state.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
us too.
Talk with folks, we like to ask, what's one thing that you would say to someone who was just starting to grow their family? Now, you can
Mm.
answer that question as is, or if you want to put your own spin on it, what would you say to somebody who's just experienced a loss?
Well, I think there's 2 points. So, somebody who is just starting to grow their family is a place that I have a really hard time with because
Mhm.
I would never, as just like a friend, I would never want to pop that bubble.
Mhm.
Because I just feel like it's pointless. But if I were a doctor, if I were like a medical professional, if I were talking to somebody who was, oh, I'm so excited. Like next year, I'm going to get pregnant. Like we're going to try in October. So we'll have our baby in, like
Right.
that language that people use.
Mm,
I would say like, you know, I would like, I wouldn't let that slide if I were a medical professional. I mean, when I think about like, for example, I'll just like use the example of when I work with like doulas or primary care or like care practitioners like an OB that does office visits and stuff. Like I say like I think it's good to normalize like this set of outcomes that are possible. So you're not going to say like, hey, just so you know, you might have a miscarriage. But what you could say is, our hope is that this pregnancy will be, fully, will be easy for you without complication. And in that case, we would see you once a month until this point, blah, 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 blah. And what I also want you to know is that not every pregnancy is uncomplicated. And we don't need to get into the details of what that would look like. But I want you to know that for any of the things that come up, whether that be, a complication or a genetic situation or a miscarriage, that like we are here to be with you every step of the way, no matter what the outcome is. Right. So just some blanket language around that. And I actually base that off of my own experience when I was in childbirth class with Charlotte, like, getting towards the end of my pregnancy, the person who was teaching the class said, nobody likes to think about this, but sometimes babies die. And I hope that that does not happen to any of you, but all I want you to know is that the people who work here are experienced and they will know how to take care of you. And I was like, why is she saying that? Like, and then I was like looking around and I was like, oh, yeah, well, I guess that woman's in her 40s with twins. So maybe that's, maybe she's a little high risk. Like it did not even freak me out. I just was like, oh gosh, I never even thought of that, like, so I don't think, people get so worried about like, well, I don't want to scare someone. Like, I think like the damage that you could accomplish would be would be so much less than the like alienation that you feel when your ship goes off the rails. And I think that if I were, with someone, like if someone were to be so blatant, and especially if I was like in a position of being a professional and they said something like, "Oh, I'm going to get pregnant, in August so I can have a baby in May," I would be like I hope you're like considering the fact that like it doesn't always happen that way. And, for a lot of people, that's not the way that it unfolds. I think I would be honest that way. But I also think that sometimes when I overhear things like that, like just sort of like a dark curtain comes over my brain and I'm like, "Argh!"
Mhm.
Like I wish I still lived on planet like naive.
Right.
Like it
yep.
would
Yes.
be so nice to still live there. And I haven't lived there in over 20 years. Um,
Mhm.
so I think there's that sort of just about like family building and I did, I mentioned briefly that I did have a period of infertility between my third and my fourth child. And that was actually really interesting for me because I felt so much guilt about um, how like wrecked I was by not getting pregnant because I had two living children and I felt like there were so many people that like didn't have any children. And so who am I to be like bemoaning the fact that I couldn't have a third living child? And at the same time, I felt this like outrageous sense of entitlement. Like, my full-term healthy baby died. Like, could the universe just throw me a bone and let me have one more kid? Um, and so that was something that I really didn't speak to anyone about while it was happening because I felt so conflicted and complicated about it. And so I have that sort of point of reference of the isolation. And I think I wasn't able to allow myself sort of the same grace that I always preach in my groups, which is like your experience is your experience. Like it's not your
Right.
experience relative to someone else's, it's your
Right.
experience and how you're experiencing it. Um, and then, for people, we're actually authoring a book right now. And it's like not a book, but it's like a tiny little thing that somebody with a broken brain could read that is entitled, What Do I Do Now? Which
I
is
like it.
like, yeah, it's like how there's sometimes people, I said in an email that I sent out to a lot of parents, like, the like inner me wants to call it what the bleep do I do now? And I would say that 50% of the people that I sent were like, I think you should actually title it that. And I was like, well, it might not go
Yeah.
Yeah.
over
I
well
mean,
with
I'll
everyone,
be
but
another vote for that
yeah.
that
Yeah,
camp.
I'm
same.
like, it might really resonate with people. That's true.
Mhm.
But it's interesting. And I think that like basically the takeaway, and this is circling back to your question of like, what would you say to someone who was like had just experienced a loss, is like every minute of the day is like you make the decision that you need to make to survive the next minute of this day. And so
Mhm.
whatever that is, if it's like I need to temporarily distract myself, if it's I need to like sob, if it's I need to like break things or mow the
Mhm.
lawn or go to a movie or hug my 2-year-old, or like it doesn't matter what it is, but like all day long we all make these little micro decisions. I'm gonna have a cup of coffee or not. Well, would coffee make you
Right. There
feel
are no
better?
rules.
There's no rules. And nothing that you
Hmm.
do or don't do right now is going to change your outcome, right?
Right.
It's like it's irrelevant, like what you do today in terms of
Hmm.
like, am I going to heal
Yeah.
from this loss? Like, not relevant.
Right.
It's just like 1 minute at a time, you're just surviving. You're making it through a day, and then you're making it through another day, and then you're making it through another day. And at
Hmm.
some point along your journey, something will happen where you'll be like, oh, when I did
Hmm.
this 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, I was more dysfunctional than I am now. So looks like things are changing.
Hmm.
And there you are watching your hair grow in the mirror, right? It's
Exactly. So the next question we always ask, similar to what would you say, but it's how can you show up?
Mm.
And so how can someone show up for a friend or family member either struggling to build their family or who has just experienced a loss?
I think it's interesting because when I think about struggling to build your family and loss, I think a lot about the very complicated nuances of just like everyday conversations and the things that we say to people and ask people about their family shape and structure. And
Mm-hmm.
some of those things are those things, for example, like, do you hope to have another baby one day? Or are you thinking of having kids? Are on the
Hmm.
one
How many kids do
hand,
you have when you
right, how
first
many
meet
kids
someone?
do you
That's
have?
for some people they think it's just like a innocuous like getting
It's
to know
just
you
how we
question,
introduce
Totally.
ourselves.
but it can
Hmm.
just spiral for some people.
A
Like you
hundred
don't.
percent. And for such a percent of the population, those questions they're like great conversational pieces that people love to engage in. And for a certain percentage, they're like really the last thing that we want to be doing. And so I
Hmm.
think being, compassionately curious with people that just and even acknowledging, like, I always think, like, why do people feel like they can just ask questions about, like, your reproductive intentions? Like, that's
It
pretty
should not be
rude.
small
If
talk.
somebody says,
Yeah.
like, I'm going in for surgery, you're not like, well, what's the surgery? Right? Because,
Right.
like, that's not good manners. Like, people will tell you if
Mhm.
they want to. So, if you can be compassionately curious in terms of whether that's asking about someone's family or asking about their loss, to say, I respect that, that this might be hard for you to talk about, but I know that your miscarriage is something that's probably really deeply affected you. And I want you to know that I would love to hear what that was like for you, if that's something that you're ever comfortable sharing, just to like put it out there and establish your availability. And then, in terms of somebody, I think that like, infertility is its own like extraordinary challenge because it's not, it's like, it's a vacuous in time and space experience. And so it's not like, oh, this person's experiencing infertility. Let's put together a meal train to help her out during her tough time. Like that could be the next
Right.
5 years. So that's
Right.
like a little bit of a harder thing to show up for, except for that I think that if you
Mm.
know that someone's going through something like that, I mean, the way that I think about showing up is like when you're in the room with that person and someone else starts complaining about their kids, I want to step aside with that person and be like, I just want to say that if that feels like that conversation might have been hard if I were in your shoes. So I just
Mm.
want you to know that I was noticing that. Like just that sort of like
Yeah,
validation of
I
like,
love
I'm
that.
seeing this part of you. Um,
Right.
and then in terms of showing up for people, like after there's an event, and I think that's the time where people are like, oh, we should do something. Um,
Mm.
don't ask, don't say, oh, I'll be here for you.
Let me
Let me
know what I can
know.
do.
Like just show up, maybe give a couple
Just show up.
options, always give an opt out. I'd like to bring you food. My plan is to leave it on your doorstep tomorrow night. Is that okay? Um,
Mm.
so, they could say, no, that's not okay. I already have 100 things in my freezer. And in which case you could say, great, how about a month from tomorrow? I will bring it in October. And then the other thing I think is like, don't stop showing up. Like this goes back to the idea that it's not an event, it's an identity. Like your baby dies, you have a miscarriage, like your due date is on the calendar. Your baby's milestones are still in your imagination. Like it's not over because you delivered the casserole or you walked the dog 5 times or you sent a card. You still need to hold space for it. And I don't recommend that people hold space in like a really simpering, pitying way, because that's just sometimes not the way that people want, but just like a very candid awareness of like, this must be a really hard time for you. Like you're back at work. Like, what's that like for you? I know you look like you're, getting up and getting dressed every day and like people at work sort of view you as like you're functioning normally, but like you must have to really put a lot of energy into putting that brave face forward because I know you're still really in it. So just really acknowledging that people are still in it and then acknowledging just like anniversaries and birthdays. It's been 3 months. It's Tuesday again. Wherever you are aware of those things to just let people know you're thinking of them. And many people don't even want to engage around it. I always say, like, when it's my daughter's birthday, I want people to call, but I don't want to talk to them. I just want them to
Yeah.
call. I want
Yes.
them to call or
You want
text
the
me
Right.
and be like,
acknowledgement.
I'm thinking of you. I'm like,
Yes.
great. I don't really want to have a conversation about this. It's like there's nothing left to say.
Right.
It helps to know that people are remembering.
Right. Yes. Yes. Remember me.
Hmm.
Remember my
Yeah,
baby.
and remember my baby.
Hmm. Well,
Well,
thank you, Carol.
this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for
Oh,
joining
thank you
us.
so much.
Thank you.
It's such a privilege to just have people be curious
Yes.
about you. So thank you very much for
Hmm.
having me.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week with more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so that you never miss an episode. And follow us on social media at allpathsfb or visit our website allpathsfb.org to learn more about our work. And please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. All Paths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support. And today, we want to recognize and thank bronze sponsor CCRM Fertility Boston. Your partnership is vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone who is struggling to grow their family. And to the entire All Paths community, thank you for being here. It's an honor to walk with you on your journey.